Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I moved into this suburban neighborhood about 2 years ago after my divorce. Needed a fresh start, you know? Found this decent little house with a small yard that seemed manageable for a guy who'd been living in apartments for the past decade. The homeowners association seemed reasonable enough when I signed the papers. Just basic stuff about keeping properties maintained and not painting your house neon pink. My neighbor lives in the house directly next to mine. Let's call her Karen because, well, she's exactly what you'd expect from someone with that name. From day one, she made it clear she took the neighborhood standards very seriously. She's got this lawn that looks like it belongs on a golf course, perfectly trimmed, emerald green, not a single weed in sight. She spends hours out there every weekend with various tools, measuring grass height with an actual ruler. The first few months were peaceful enough. I kept my yard neat, mowed regularly, and minded my own business, but apparently that wasn't good enough for Karen. It started with little comments when we'd run into each other getting mail or taking out trash. She'd tell me my grass was looking a bit shaggy, and I'd say I was planning to mow that weekend. Then she'd remind me about the Homeowners Association guidelines being pretty clear about lawn maintenance, like I was some kind of idiot who couldn't read. I brushed it off at first. Everyone's got their quirks, right? But the comments kept coming. Every time I saw her, she had something to say about my yard, my fence, my mailbox, you name it. Then came the incident that really set this whole thing in motion. Last month, I got home from a business trip to find an official letter from the Homeowners Association in my mailbox. Apparently, my grass was excessively long and violated community standards. I had to pay a $50 fine and get it fixed within 48 hours or face additional penalties. I was confused because I'd mowed before leaving town, but I went out to check. My grass was maybe an inch longer than usual, barely noticeable unless you were really looking for it. I was annoyed but figured I'd just take care of it and move on. But then I overheard Karen talking to Mrs. Johnson from across the street the next day while I was in my garage. Karen was bragging about how she finally reported me to the Homeowners Association because my yard had been an eyesore for weeks. She went on about how we all pay dues to maintain property values and someone had to do something. Mrs. Johnson seemed confused and said my yard didn't look that bad to her, but Karen insisted it was terrible up close and that she'd been documenting everything with photos just in case the association needed evidence. That's when I realized she'd been actively watching my property, waiting for any excuse to cause trouble. I was furious but tried to keep my cool. No point in starting a neighbor war over grass length, right? Wrong. Over the next few weeks, Karen stepped up her surveillance. I'd catch her peering over the fence, taking pictures of my yard with her phone. She reported me 2 more times, once for having a small dandelion near my driveway, and another time for my garden hose being improperly stored because I left it coiled on the ground instead of hung up. I was getting fined left and right, and Karen was clearly enjoying every minute of it. She'd make these passive-aggressive comments whenever she saw me, pointing out another litter from the Homeowners Association and commenting about how it was such a shame when people don't take pride in their property. That's when I decided I'd had enough of playing defense. Time to get creative. I started paying closer attention to Karen's routine. Every morning at exactly 6 a.m., her sprinkler system would kick on and water her precious lawn for exactly 20 minutes. She was obsessive about her schedule, same time, every day, like clockwork. I also noticed she was so focused on finding problems with other people's yards that she never actually read the Homeowners Association rules herself. If she had, she'd know that wildflowers and clover are technically considered natural landscaping and are in violations when they don't exceed a certain height. So I came up with my plan. Every morning at 5:55 a.m., I'd sneak over to her yard with a small bag of wildflower seeds. Nothing dramatic, just a tiny sprinkle here and there while her sprinklers were still off. I'd scatter a few daisy seeds near her front walkway, some clover along the edge of her driveway, maybe a few black-eyed Susan seeds by her mailbox. The timing was perfect. By the time her sprinklers turned on 5 minutes later, the seeds would get watered automatically. And since I was doing it gradually over weeks, it looked completely natural. At first, Karen didn't notice anything, but after about 2 weeks, tiny green shoots started popping up in random spots across her perfect lawn. Then the first daisy bloomed right in the middle of her front yard. I was pulling weeds in my own garden when I heard her discover it. She was cursing and asking what that flower was and where it came from. She spent the whole morning digging up that single daisy and replanting grass seed in its place. But the next week, 3 more daisies popped up, along with some clover near her driveway. Karen started getting increasingly frantic. She'd be out there every morning searching her lawn like a detective looking for evidence. She hired a lawn service company to treat for weeds. But of course, that didn't stop new seeds from sprouting. The really satisfying part was watching her try to explain the situation to other neighbors. She'd tell them she didn't understand what was happening to her lawn, and that these weeds just kept appearing overnight. She was convinced someone might be sabotaging her. Mr. Peterson would suggest maybe it was just natural, that sometimes seeds blow over from other yards or get carried by birds. But Karen would insist it was definitely intentional, and that someone was deliberately trying to ruin her property. But she couldn't prove anything, and the more paranoid she sounded, the less people believed her. After about 6 weeks of my morning seed sprinkling routine, Karen's lawn looked completely different. What used to be a monotonous green carpet was now dotted with cheerful yellow daisies, purple clover blooms, and patches of natural wild flowers. Honestly, it looked way better than before, more natural and welcoming. Yesterday was the breaking point. I was having my morning coffee when I heard Karen absolutely lose it in her front yard. She was screaming about who was ruining her grass and how she knew someone was doing this on purpose. She kept yelling that this was vandalism and she was going to find out who was responsible and have them arrested. She was standing in the middle of her yard in her bathrobe, shaking her fist at the sky like she was cursing the gardening gods. The irony is that her lawn still technically meets all homeowners association guidelines. The flowers aren't tall enough to violate height restrictions, and wildflowers are actually encouraged in our community guidelines as environmentally friendly landscaping choices. Karen must have finally read the homeowners association rules, because I saw her frantically trying to pull up every single flower by hand. She was out there for 3 hours, sweating and cursing, trying to restore her perfect lawn. Too bad for her that wildflower roots run deep, and I've been very thorough with my seed distribution over the past month and a half. Karen filed a complaint with the homeowners association about someone vandalizing her property with unauthorized plantings, but they told her that without evidence of who did it, there's nothing they can do. Plus, the flowers actually make the neighborhood look more attractive. I'm still doing my early morning seed runs just to make sure her lawn stays nice and colorful. Every time she pulls up a patch of daisies, new ones sprout somewhere else. She's spending more time maintaining her perfect lawn now than ever before, and it still looks like a meadow. Sometimes I catch her staring at my yard with this defeated expression, probably wondering how my grass stays so boringly uniform while hers keeps blooming like a botanical garden. The homeowners association hasn't sent me any more violation letters, and Karen has stopped making comments about my property. I think she's too busy dealing with her own weed problem to worry about anyone else's lawn. Every time she pulls up a patch of daisies, new ones sprout somewhere else. She's spending more time maintaining her perfect lawn now than ever before, and it still looks like a meadow. I work in engineering, and this story takes me back to when I was at a smaller manufacturing company. The place had around 70 to 80 employees, which meant everyone knew everyone else's business. I was part of the engineering department, and my main job was handling design changes. Whenever we needed to modify a part or update assembly drawings, I was the guy who made it happen. The company had this old school system where everything was done on paper. If we needed to make a change, I'd put together a thick packet of documents that would get passed around from engineering to manufacturing. Sometimes these packets would bounce back and forth between departments for weeks, especially on complicated projects that needed input from multiple people. Papers would get lost on someone's desk, signatures would be missing, and the whole process was a nightmare. Management decided they were tired of the chaos and invested in some fancy software that was supposed to eliminate all the paperwork. The idea sounded great on paper, but like most things at that company, the execution was terrible. We had a bare-bones staff and nobody had time to properly learn how the software worked or figure out how to make it efficient. The way they set it up was completely backwards. When someone entered an item into an engineering change order, the software would lock down that part completely. Not only could manufacturing not build anything with that part, but sales couldn't even take orders for products that used it. The whole system would freeze until the change process was complete, which could take weeks. I tried explaining this problem to my manager multiple times. I told him that if we ever had to work on a component that was used across several of our products, it would bring everything to a complete stop. He understood what I was saying and agreed it was a problem, but he could never get all the right people in a room to actually fix the software procedure. My manager was a decent guy who had worked his way up from the shop floor. He knew the technical side of things, but wasn't great at dealing with office politics. He'd nod along when I explained the issues, promised to bring it up with the higher-ups, but nothing ever happened. Meanwhile, the software sat there like a ticking time bomb, waiting to cause chaos. The bomb finally went off on a Tuesday morning in March. My manager walked over to my desk with a work order in his hand, and that look on his face that meant I wasn't going to like what came next. He told me that I needed to redesign the mounting bracket assembly because the customer wanted it reinforced for their new application. When I asked which mounting bracket he meant, he confirmed it was a standard one we used on everything. I stared at him for a moment, then pulled up our product catalog on my computer. The mounting bracket he was talking about was literally used in every single machine we manufactured. Every single one. I explained to him what would happen when I entered this into the system. I told him that sales wouldn't be able to take any orders until this change was completely processed. I warned him that this was going to shut down the entire company and that nobody would be able to sell anything. He said he understood my concern, but the customer needed it done. He told me to just enter it and that we'd figure it out. He walked away before I could argue further. I sat there staring at my computer screen knowing I was about to cause absolute chaos. But orders were orders, so I opened up the engineering change software and started the process. The system immediately flagged the mounting bracket as under revision and locked it out completely. Within 30 minutes, my phone started ringing. First call was from Jim in sales. He sounded confused and a little panicked. He told me he was trying to enter an order for Peterson Manufacturing, but the system wouldn't let him. He said it showed the mounting bracket was under revision and wanted to know what was going on. I explained that I had just started an engineering change on that part and that the system locks everything down until the change is approved. When he asked how long that would take, I told him it could be weeks, maybe longer. He mentioned he had 3 customers waiting for quotes who all needed their machines next month. I reminded him that I had tried to warn management about this exact scenario and that the software wasn't set up properly. He hung up without saying goodbye, and I could practically hear him walking toward the front office to raise hell. About 20 minutes later, my desk phone rang again. This time it was Sarah from customer service. She asked what I had done to the system because she couldn't process any orders. She said everything showed as unavailable. I explained that the mounting bracket was under engineering review, and since it was used in all our machines, the whole product line was locked. She said it was insane because she had customers calling asking where their orders were, and she couldn't tell them anything. I suggested she talk to management since I had warned them this would happen. She said she planned to do exactly that. The calls kept coming. Manufacturing wanted to know why they couldn't pull parts for production. Purchasing couldn't order materials because they didn't know what was going to be needed. The whole company was grinding to a halt, and everyone was looking for someone to blame. I was sitting at my desk trying to focus on actually working on the bracket design when I heard heavy footsteps approaching. I looked up to see the vice president of the entire company walking toward me with a look that could melt steel. This was a guy I'd maybe spoken to twice in the 3 years I'd worked there. He asked what exactly was going on with our ordering system. I explained that I had started an engineering change on the mounting bracket like my manager requested, and that the software locks down any part that's under revision. When he asked how many of our products used this mounting bracket, I told him all of them. The VP's face went through several interesting color changes. He stood there for a moment, probably calculating how much money the company was losing every hour that sales couldn't take orders. He asked how we could fix this. I told him someone needed to sit down with IT, manufacturing, sales, and engineering to properly configure the software. I explained that right now it was set up like a sledgehammer when we needed a scalpel. When he asked what I meant, I explained that the system should allow for different levels of changes. I told him a minor revision shouldn't shut down the entire product line and that we needed approval workflows, partial locks, and override capabilities for urgent situations. He asked how long I had known about this problem. I told him I had been raising this issue for months and that I had warned my manager that if we ever had to change a common component, it would bring everything to a stop. The VP's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone and started making calls right there at my desk. He called Karen from project management and told her he needed her in the conference room in 10 minutes with the IT director and manufacturing manager because we had a situation. He made 3 more calls, then told me I was coming to the meeting because he wanted me to explain exactly what needed to be fixed. The meeting was intense. Karen from project management tried to deflect blame, insisting the software was working designed. The IT director kept talking about system integrity and data security. Meanwhile, the manufacturing manager was getting angrier by the minute. I laid out exactly what was wrong with the current setup and what needed to be changed. The VP listened to everyone's excuses for about 15 minutes before he'd had enough. He said he didn't want to hear another word about why we couldn't fix this. He told everyone he wanted to know when it would be fixed and that we were losing money every hour the system was down. Karen suggested we would need to schedule meetings with all the stakeholders, review the requirements, and possibly bring in consultants. The VP cut her off and said no. He told everyone this needed to be fixed that week, that he wanted daily progress reports, and that I would be involved in every decision. They spent the next 3 days completely overhauling the software configuration. I worked directly with IT to set up different revision levels, approval workflows, and emergency overrides. The mounting bracket change got expedited through the system and approved within a week. Karen tried to take credit for streamlining the engineering change process in the company newsletter, but everyone knew what really happened. Sales still brings up the day engineering broke the company whenever they want to make a point about communication. My house sits on a corner lot with a nice view of the intersection, and I've got one of those video doorbells that my sister convinced me to install after a string of package thefts in the area last year. My next-door neighbor moved in about 8 months ago. Right from the start, something seemed off about him. He was the type who would measure exactly where his property line ended and make sure you knew if your sprinkler hit even an inch of his grass. He complained to the homeowners association about everything like kids riding bikes too loudly, people parking slightly crooked, Christmas decorations staying up too long. Most of us learned to just avoid him. The guy worked some kind of import business from his home office. I knew this because he was always getting packages from overseas and would make a huge production of checking tracking numbers and calling shipping companies when things didn't arrive exactly when he expected them. He treated every delivery like it was a matter of life and death. Last Tuesday started like any normal day. I was working at my computer when I heard shouting outside. At first I figured it was just kids playing or someone calling their dog, but the yelling got louder and more aggressive. I looked out my window and saw my neighbor standing by his mailbox, waving his arms and shouting at our postal worker. Our mailman is this really nice older guy who's been delivering to our route for probably 15 years. He knows everyone's names, always asks about your family, and goes out of his way to make sure packages are hidden from view. Real salt-of-the-earth type. I opened my window a crack to hear what was going on. My neighbor was demanding to know where his package was and accusing the mailman of stealing it. He kept shouting that he knew the mailman had taken something valuable, that belonged to him. The mailman looked confused and kept trying to explain that he didn't know what my neighbor was talking about. He said he had delivered everything he had for that address and seemed genuinely worried about the accusations. My neighbor got even angrier and started yelling about how his package from Japan was supposed to be here yesterday. He claimed it was worth thousands of dollars and now it was missing. The way he was carrying on, you'd think someone had stolen his life savings. The mailman suggested that sometimes international packages get delayed and told my neighbor he should check the tracking number or call the post office. He was trying to be helpful and calm the situation down, but my neighbor wasn't having any of it. He said he had already called and been told the package was delivered yesterday, but it wasn't at his house. He accused the mailman of being the only one with access to his mail, so he had to be the thief. The mailman looked genuinely confused and a little worried. He was holding his mailbag close to his chest like he was trying to protect himself. He promised that he hadn't taken any package and said he'd been doing this job for 20 years without ever stealing mail. That just made my neighbor even madder. He started screaming about how those 20 years were probably 20 years of stealing from people. He even accused the mailman of running some kind of operation where he sold stolen packages online. That's when I saw my neighbor grab something from his porch. It was my wooden mailbox post that he'd apparently ripped right out of the ground. The metal mailbox was still attached to it, making it this heavy, dangerous weapon. The mailman begged him to calm down and suggested they just call the post office to sort everything out. You could hear the fear in his voice when he realized how dangerous the situation was getting. But my neighbor was done talking. He screamed that the mailman had stolen from him, and now he was going to pay for it. He raised the mailbox over his head and started swinging it at the mailman like some kind of medieval weapon. The poor mailman dropped his mailbag and fell to the ground, trying to crawl away while my neighbor kept swinging this makeshift club at him. He kept begging for my neighbor to stop and insisting that he hadn't taken anything. My neighbor wouldn't listen. He kept calling the mailman a liar and a thief, screaming that he was going to teach him not to mess with people's property. I grabbed my phone and called 911 immediately. I told the dispatcher that I needed police and an ambulance because my neighbor was attacking the mailman with a mailbox post on Maple Street. The dispatcher asked if I was safe and if I was witnessing what was happening right then. I confirmed that I was watching from my window and described how the mailman was on the ground while my neighbor was hitting him. The dispatcher said officers were on their way and told me to stay inside and keep watching in case they needed more information. The whole attack probably lasted about 2 minutes, but it felt like forever. My neighbor kept screaming about his missing package while swinging my destroyed mailbox at this poor man who was just trying to do his job. The mailman managed to roll under a car parked on the street, which probably saved him from worse injuries. When the police arrived, my neighbor was still standing there holding the wooden post, breathing heavily and shouting about theft and incompetence. The officers immediately ordered him to drop the weapon and put his hands up. But instead of listening, my neighbor started ranting about how the mailman had stolen his package and was the real criminal in this situation. The police gave him another warning to drop the makeshift weapon or they would use their taser on him. Instead of complying, my neighbor started walking toward the officers with the mailbox post still in his hands. He kept insisting that they should be arresting the mailman instead of him because he was the victim. He acted like attacking someone with a weapon was perfectly reasonable under the circumstances. The officers gave him one last warning to drop the weapon. My neighbor just got more agitated and started threatening to call his lawyer. He acted like the police didn't know who they were dealing with and would regret messing with him. The officers had to tackle him to get the makeshift weapon away. Even then, he kept struggling and screaming about conspiracies and stolen packages. They ended up having to use 2 sets of handcuffs because he wouldn't stop thrashing around and fighting them. The paramedics checked on the mailman who had cuts on his arms and back from trying to shield himself. They took him to the hospital for stitches and to check for a possible concussion. One of the officers asked me if I had seen what happened. I told him I witnessed the whole thing and that my doorbell camera had recorded everything too. The officer asked if I could send them the footage, which I agreed to do right away. I also mentioned that this guy had been a problem neighbor for months but I never thought he would actually hurt someone. The officer asked about the mailbox and whether it belonged to me. I confirmed that my neighbor had ripped it right out of my yard to use as a weapon. The officer just shook his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Later that day, I found out the full story from another neighbor who knows someone at the post office. My neighbor's package had actually been delivered to the wrong address 3 blocks away. The homeowner there had been trying to contact him for 2 days to arrange pickup, but my neighbor had been so busy accusing everyone of theft that he never answered his phone or checked his messages. The package was sitting safely on someone's porch the entire time, waiting for him to come get it. My neighbor got charged with assault with a deadly weapon, destruction of property, and resisting arrest. The doorbell footage made it impossible for him to claim self-defense or argue that it was just a misunderstanding. You can clearly see him grab my mailbox post and start attacking an innocent person. The mailman recovered after a few days off work, though he said he was nervous about delivering to our street for a while. The post office ended up pressing charges too, since attacking a federal employee is a serious crime. My neighbor's house went up for sale about a month later. I heard he got 6 months in jail and had to pay thousands of dollars in fines and medical bills. His import business collapsed while he was locked up, and he couldn't afford the legal fees and mortgage payments. I installed a new mailbox in the exact same spot where the old one used to be. The whole thing could have been avoided with one phone call to the right address. People mistake me for a guy when I talk on the phone. My voice is naturally deep and raspy, something I got from my dad's side of the family. When I was younger, it was embarrassing when my friends' parents would answer the phone and tell me to hold on while they got their daughter, thinking I was some young man calling. Now I've learned to deal with it. Most people are polite about it when I correct them. The whole situation started 3 months ago when I moved to a new apartment across town. I had to update my address with my car insurance company, which should have been simple enough. When I called the first time, their system was down. The second time, I got transferred around for an hour before getting disconnected. The third time, they told me I needed to mail in a form, which I did, but it got lost somewhere. So here I was on my 4th attempt, already frustrated with their customer service, when I dialed their number again. I'd taken the morning off work to deal with this, because I was tired of getting reminder notices in the mail about updating my information. The phone rang a few times before someone picked up. The representative greeted me and asked how he could help, but he called me Sir. I told him I needed to update my address and politely corrected him, explaining that I was actually a woman, not a man. He said he understood, but then proceeded to ask for my policy number while still calling me Sir. I figured maybe he didn't hear me clearly, so I gave him the information and waited while he pulled up my account. Once he found my account, he asked for my new address but continued addressing me as Sir. I decided to be more direct this time and asked him to call me ma'am instead, making it clear again that I was a woman. But he just brushed off my correction and kept going with the address update, still calling me Sir. At this point, I realized this guy either wasn't listening to me at all or was deliberately ignoring what I was telling him. I'd dealt with this kind of thing before, but usually people apologize and fix it right away. This representative seemed determined to keep calling me Sir no matter what I said. I gave him my new address and he started reading it back to confirm everything was correct, once again using Sir when he spoke to me. That's when I decided I'd had enough of his attitude. I confirmed the address was right, but I called him ma'am when I answered. There was a noticeable pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear him processing what I'd just said. He continued with his security questions, asking me to verify my date of birth while still calling me Sir. I answered politely but made sure to address him as ma'am again. Another pause followed, this one longer than the first. He asked me to confirm my car's make and model, maintaining his stubborn use of Sir. I gave him the information about my 2018 Honda Civic while continuing to call him ma'am in return. He snapped and told me to stop calling him ma'am. I acted innocent and apologized, saying I was just trying to be polite and asking if there was a problem. I could hear him getting agitated, but I wasn't about to stop. He'd had multiple chances to correct his mistake and acknowledge that I was a woman but he kept doubling down on calling me sir. He told me he didn't know what game I was playing but said I needed to address him properly. I played dumb and said I understood his frustration while continuing to call him ma'am, claiming I've been trying to address him properly the whole time. That's when he really lost it. He shouted that he wasn't a ma'am and that he was a man. I agreed with him while still using ma'am, telling him I heard him loud and clear. His voice was getting higher and more strained. I could tell he was losing his patience, but honestly, so had I. I've been dealing with their terrible customer service for months, and now I had to deal with someone who couldn't be bothered to listen when I politely corrected him multiple times. He threatened to end the call if I didn't stop calling him ma'am. I told him that was his choice while continuing to use the wrong title, explaining that I was just trying to get my address updated like any normal customer would. He'd had enough and said that he didn't have to deal with my behavior. Then he hung up on me. I sat there for a moment, looking at my phone before I started laughing. The irony was perfect. He got completely bent out of shape about being called the wrong thing, but he couldn't understand why I might feel the same way. I called back right away and got a different representative, a woman this time, who was incredibly professional. She apologized for the previous call, updated my address without any issues, and even noted on my account that I'm female to prevent future confusion. The whole thing took less than 5 minutes. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a supervisor at the insurance company asking about my experience with customer service. The first representative had filed some kind of complaint about me being difficult and disrespectful. I explained exactly what happened, how I politely corrected him multiple times, and how he'd refused to acknowledge it. The supervisor was mortified. She told me that all calls are recorded and that she'd be reviewing the conversation. A few days later, she called me back to apologize again and let me know that the representative would be receiving additional training on customer service and respect. To this day, whenever I have a bad day or need a good laugh, I think about that conversation. The guy spent the entire call insisting I was wrong about my own gender, then got furious when I did the exact same thing to him. My specialty is geriatric care, and I've always found working with elderly patients rewarding. They have so many stories to tell and often just need someone to listen. My name is French in origin, which means it has extra letters that most people don't expect. Think of it like having silent letters or accents that completely change how you'd normally spell it. I get it misspelled constantly on paperwork, name tags, even my paycheck sometimes. I'm not sensitive about it, but I do make a point to correct people so they can learn the proper spelling. I even have a little memory trick I share with people to help them remember it. Most folks appreciate the help and make an effort after that. Our hospital is pretty small, so we all know each other fairly well. The day shift and night shift don't overlap much, but we hear about what goes on through the grapevine. That's how I first heard about the new certified nursing assistant who started working nights about 6 months ago. Karen came to us with what she claimed was extensive experience from a bigger facility across town. From day one, she made it clear she thought she was better than everyone else. The other nurses told me she would strut around in this crisp white coat like she was some kind of doctor. Most of us nurses just wear scrubs. White coats went out of style years ago, and they're not practical when you're doing hands-on patient care. But Karen wore that coat like it was a badge of honor. She'd demand that we nurses hand over medications to give to patients without giving us any background on what was happening with them. That's not how it works. We need to know what's going on so we can properly assess the patient and watch for side effects. When other nursing assistants would ask her questions, she'd roll her eyes and talk to them like they were idiots. I heard from the day shift that she was rude to families too, acting like their questions were bothering her. She treated the patients terribly. These are vulnerable people, often confused or scared, and they need compassion. Karen would talk down to them like they were children, not bothering to explain what she was doing or why. Several families complained about her attitude, but since she worked nights, the administrators didn't see her behavior firsthand. Her name, ironically, is spelled the simplest possible way. No extra letters, no unusual combinations, Just the most basic, common spelling you could imagine. You'd have to try to get it wrong. I usually work days, so I'd only heard about Karen secondhand until last month when I picked up some extra night shifts to help with staffing. That's when I finally got to experience her personality myself. Our rooms have whiteboards where we write the names of the staff taking care of each patient. It helps the patients and families know who to ask for if they need something. Usually, the nursing assistant gets to the rooms first during shift change and puts up the names for the night. I was making my rounds, checking on my assigned patients, when I noticed something on the boards. Karen had spelled my name wrong. Not just a little wrong, but completely butchered it. She'd left out half the important letters and added ones that didn't belong. It looked like she'd just guessed. I quietly erased my name and wrote it correctly. No big deal, happens all the time. But then I saw the same thing in the next room, and the next. Every single room had my name spelled wrong in a different creative way. It was like she wasn't even trying. I found Karen at the nurse's station sitting behind the desk like she owned the place. That white coat perfectly pressed. I approached her and politely pointed out that she had misspelled my name on all the room boards. I explained that I had fixed them and offered to show her the correct spelling for future reference. I even started to share my little memory trick that helps people remember how to spell it properly. Her response was anything but polite. She snapped at me, telling me she didn't have time for that kind of thing. She waved her hand at me like I was bothering her with something completely unreasonable. She went on to say that she had real work to do instead of wasting time memorizing what she called everyone's stupid name spellings. She turned back to whatever she was doing on the computer, clearly considering our conversation over. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. This woman couldn't be bothered to spell my name correctly, something that takes literally 2 seconds of effort. But she expected everyone else to cater to her demands. I looked at the assignment board to see which rooms Karen was covering that night. Nursing assistants typically get assigned to about twice as many patients as nurses do, since they're not responsible for medications and complex medical decisions. Karen had 12 rooms that night. I made another round, but this time I had a different purpose. In each of Karen's 12 rooms, I erased her name from the whiteboard. Then I rewrote it with the longest, most ridiculous misspelling I could think of. I added extra letters, threw in some silent consonants, changed the vowels, basically turned her simple common name into something that looked like it belonged in a French poetry book. In room 204, I wrote her name was about 15 letters instead of 5. In room 208, I gave it a completely different pronunciation by changing all the vowels. Room 215 got a version with 3 extra consonants clustered together. I was creative but consistent. Each room had a different elaborate misspelling. Her name was so simple originally that these crazy spellings looked absolutely ridiculous. Anyone reading them would immediately know they were wrong, but they were technically still pronounceable if you really tried. I finished my rounds and went about my normal duties. About an hour later, I heard Karen's voice getting louder near the nurse's station. She was demanding to know who had messed with the boards in her rooms, clearly upset about someone changing her name to what she called stupid spellings. One of the other nurses asked what she was talking about, genuinely confused by Karen's outburst. Karen explained that someone had gone into her rooms and changed her name to all these ridiculous versions. She was holding a notepad where she'd apparently written down all the different misspellings I created. The other nurse looked at the list and commented on how wrong they were, then suggested maybe the whiteboard letters were sticking and that Karen should ask maintenance to fix them. Karen insisted that someone had done this on purpose, getting upset as she declared it was sabotage. She demanded to know who was responsible for what she saw as a deliberate attack on her. The other nurse just shrugged and went back to her charting, clearly not interested in Karen's drama. Karen walked off toward her assigned rooms, presumably to fix all the name boards. I kept working, helping my patients and doing my normal rounds. Every time I passed one of Karen's rooms, I could see her inside frantically erasing and rewriting her name. She was clearly flustered, and that pristine white coat was getting more rumpled by the hour. About 2 hours later, I was walking past the nurse's station when Karen approached me. Her attitude was completely different now, less arrogant, more cautious. She apologized for her earlier behavior, saying she thought she was having a rough night. She then asked if I could remind her how to spell my name correctly, her tone much more respectful than before. I told her it was no problem and showed her again. I explained my memory trick and even wrote it down for her on a piece of paper so she'd have a reference. She thanked me and promised to make sure she got it right from now on. And she did. For the rest of that shift and every shift after, my name appeared correctly on every board. She even started asking other staff members about the correct spellings of their names too. The white coat disappeared after a few weeks, replaced by practical scrubs like the rest of us wore. I never told anyone what I'd done that night. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.